Hi guys, welcome to this video lesson. Today we are going to talk about the Dubliners, a work, a collection of short stories which James Joyce published in 1914. And in particular, we will go through the structure and the setting in time and place, the division of the short stories into four groups. After this, we're going to talk about the characters and the use of realism and symbolism into this collection of short stories. The use of the epiphany, which is very important. And after this, we are going to talk about the style and after this, I just want to focus our attention on the passage Gabriel's epiphany, which is very important, and it is the conclusion of the Dubliners, and we're going to analyze this passage. But let's start from the beginning now. The structure and the setting of this work. Dubliners consists of 15 short stories, and all these short stories lack of an obvious action. They are characterized by the absence of action, and it is the story of some human situations are displayed, and all these stories lead to a kind of moral, social, or spiritual revelation at the end of each story. The opening story, the opening stories of Dubliners deal with childhood and youth in Dublin, which is the city in which all the events take place. And after the childhood, the other stories advancing in time and concern with the middle years of the characters and their social, political, and religious affairs. We have to say that while most of the Victorian writers had celebrated the development of English civilization and the rise of the city, Joyce actually, who was a modernist novelist, he was actually hostile to the city life. He found that the city life was a kind of degradation for its citizens, and had really bad effects on its citizens. In fact, Dublin is a place where true feeling and compassion for the others don't exist, and instead we have the cruelty and the selfishness of the characters, which are the main focuses, we can say, which are the main expressions of these characters. The stories are arranged into four groups, and as Joyce himself explained, that his intention was to write a chapter of the moral history of his country, and he chose Dublin for the scene because this city seems to him the center of paralysis, and this is a key word in all the stories described by James Joyce. Paralysis, the lack of action, the incapability of the characters to act, to move their lives. And Joyce say that he has tried to present this paralysis to the indifferent public under 4 stages of life. And 4 aspects: the childhood, the adolescence, the maturity, and the public life. And the last story is The Dead. The title is The Dead. Was considered Joyce's first masterpiece. The last episode summarizes all the themes and the motives of all the other 13 stories of the collection, and it functions as an epilogue, as a final section of the work. And this episode also anticipates Joyce's move away from the short story toward the novel. And this is the scheme of Dubliners. The main city is the Dublin, and the four stages of life, and these are the names, the titles of the stories. And The Dead is the last one, and it belongs to the section public life. The characters, and all the characters are oppressed by religion, policy, culture, and by the economic forces. And these characters all belong to the lower middle class. And Joyce tried to use their lives as a raw material for a psychologically realistic picture of these citizens of the Dubliners, described as afflicted people. Everyone in Dublin seems to be caught up in an endless net of despair. Even if they wanted to escape, to go away, like Evelyn, the story of Evelyn, this young woman, is the perfect example. They are unable to escape. This young woman is caught by a paralysis. She's incapable of action, and because she's spiritually weak. And instead of choosing a new life in Buenos Aires, she decides to stay in Dublin. Evelyn, she's the main character, the protagonist of Evelyn, the short story, in the adolescence section. There is a kind of realism and symbolism in each story. The description is very realistic, extremely tight, concise, very short, and we have a lot of external details, also unpleasant and depressing details. So the use of realism is mixed with the symbolism, because all the external details have a deeper meaning. For example, the name of certain objects has a symbolic meanings because they are carefully chosen by the writer and stands out from the naturalistic context in which they are placed. For example, the choice of the term street organ, which is also called harmonium in the short story Evelyn. This word is in contrast with the everyday words for the rest of the furniture in this sitting room. And this word, the street organ, takes a symbolic meaning. It points out that this harmony of Evelyn's family, where the dead mother was a victim of an aggressive father, and Evelyn now shares the same destiny of her mother. There is also a religious symbolism, like the holy chalice, which is mysteriously broken and is crucial to the real meaning of the sisters, which is the opening story of Dubliners. Then we have the color symbolism, and for example with the use of the brown, the gray and the yellow, that these colors suggest the pervading atmosphere of despair and paralysis. The use of epiphany is very important in Dubliners, and in particular in the last story, The Dead. We are going to read about a passage taken from this last story, The Dead. The function of symbolism for Joyce was to take the reader beyond the usual aspects of life through the analysis of the particular. For this reason, Joyce employed a peculiar technique which was called the epiphany, which is the sudden spiritual manifestation which is caused by an insignificant and unimportant event or gesture or an external object or a banal situation. And this insignificant situation reveals the character's inner truth. So this is a revelatory moment, and to the reader's attention, this is a very meaningful for the narrative. And we finished talking about the style. Dubliners is not one of the major in Dubliners, Joyce didn't use a lot of innovations, such as in his mature works like Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. The style in Dubliners is characterized by two distinct elements, like the interior monologue with patterned repetition of images, and which is also called chiasmus. The chiasmus is the reversal of the word order. In the first three short stories, which is the childhood section, Joyce employs a first-person narrator, and it may be the same little boy for each of the stories. And this narrator describes the events from the point of view of the young boy. This allows the reader to penetrate the boy's mind. For the other 12 stories, Joyce uses a third-person narrator, and he often shares a particular character's perspective and tends to reflect the language and the sensitivity of the person who is being described. The narrator tends to disappear in the interior monologue, which is in the form of the free direct speech. The free direct speech is the protagonist's pure thoughts, which are introduced without any reporting verbs. And this implies the disappearance of the narrator from the text. All this technique allows the reader to acquire a direct knowledge of the character's mind. Also, the syntactical structure is very important because the syntax maintains the exclamations, the questions, the repetitions, and exaggerations. So this particular language of the Dubliners appear to be very simple, objective, and neutral. And the language is adapted to the characters according to their age, to their social class, and to their role. The chiasmus, which is the reversal word order, can create melodic effects, as in the final sentence of The Dead. This is the final paragraph. In its final paragraph, which is often considered one of the most beautiful in the 20th century, we have got Gabriel, the character Gabriel, and this is the last sentence of the story, The Dead. And Gabriel, after his moment of epiphany, we have the description of his soul swooned, which is fainted with emotion, and Gabriel's soul is overcome with emotion, and he heard the snow falling through the universe, and falling like the descent of the last stand upon all the living and all the dead. It is like the snow becomes universal and falls upon all the living and all the dead. This is an image of universality in the last sentence of The Dead. And now I just want to analyze Gabriel's epiphany and the passage on page 257. And this is the story of Gabriel Conroy and Greta, his life. The story opens with their going to the annual Christmas party given by Julie and Kate Morgan, who are Gabriel's aunts. There is eating, drinking, and merrymaking at the party, during which Gabriel meets several people, among whom a nationalistic and irritating young woman who accuses him of being a West Briton. This exchange makes Gabriel unsure of himself. From then on, the evening becomes a disaster for him. He gives a well-received speech, but he thinks it is a superficial triumph. Towards the end of the evening, Greta hears a song which reminds her of a young man she had fallen in love, Michael Forey. And this young boy died for his love to her when she was 17 years old. After the party, Gabriel and his wife come back to their room in a hotel nearby, and after consuming their physical passion, Gabriel had noticed that his wife was very far away from him, because she was thinking about that song that reminded her about that young man. And after this, she falls asleep, and Gabriel watches her with an affectionate pity. And this is the first the passage which follows, and I just want you to listen to this recording with an extract of this passage. After this, we are going to analyze this passage. Okay.
James Joyce, Gabriel's Epiphany.
She was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few moments unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-open mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. So she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and as he thought of what she must have been then, in that time of her first girlish beauty, a strange friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say even to himself that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew that it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved death. Perhaps she had not told him all the story. His eyes moved to the chair over which she had thrown some of her clothes. A petticoat string dangled to the floor, one boot stood upright, its limp upper fallen down. The fellow of it lay upon its side. He wondered at his riot of emotions of an hour before. From what had it proceeded? From his aunt's supper, from his own foolish speech, from the wine and dancing, the merrymaking when saying good night in the hall, the pleasure of the walk along the river in the snow. Poor Aunt Julia! She too would soon be a shade with the shade of Patrick Morkan and his horse. He had caught that haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing Arrayed for the Bridal. Soon, perhaps, he would be sitting in the same drawing-room, dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. The blinds would be drawn down, and Aunt Kate would be sitting beside him, crying and blowing her nose, and telling him how Julia had died. He would cast about in his mind for some words that might console her, and he would find only lame and useless ones. Yes, that would happen very soon. The air of the room chilled his shoulders. He stretched himself cautiously along under the sheets and lay down beside his wife. One by one, they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world, in the full glory of some passion, than fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a grey, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead.
Okay, very well. I just want to focus on the epiphany. Gabriel's epiphany comes in the fourth and five lines, and the Gabriel's epiphany is marked by all these red dots. The epiphany comes after Gabriel is looking at his wife sleeping, and it's very insignificant and unimportant event develops into a kind of sudden revelation of the truth. And the revelation of the truth in Gabriel is that his wife was still in love with another man, and that the relationship was actually very fake, false, and it was like he and she had never lived together as a wife and husband. And this was the moment of the epiphany. But the passage is full of symbols and may be divided into two parts, and we can distinguish two different parts. The first part goes from lines 1 up to 33, and it describes the violent display of Gabriel's emotions. Instead, the second part goes from line 34 up to line 32, and this part describes an intense moment of existence. After this, we have we can identify a visual analysis, and each highlighted and colors, the words highlighted and in different colors represents different meanings. For example, the words in pink, they represent the setting in place. The words highlighted in light blue, they represent Gabriel's thoughts expressed in the past simple and past continuous, and instead the narration is told in the present. The words highlighted in green are the Gabriel's thoughts expressed in the past perfect. Instead, the narration is in the past tense. Words highlighted in yellow are the Gabriel's thoughts expressed in the conditional, and the narration is told in the future form. The arrows, the gray arrows, they represent are the lines where there is a passage from outer stimuli to the inner reality. So an event coming from the outside, which has an effect to the inner reality of the character. Then we have the words underlined in blue. They are realistic descriptions. And the words highlighted in pink, they are symbols. Okay, the explanation of this passage and the explanation of these symbols. We have a lot of symbols in this passage. And according to the Bible, Gabriel is both the Prince of Fire and the Angel of Death. Gabriel Conroy is often connected with warmth, therefore with fire, and can be considered spiritually dead until the end of the passage. As for Michael, the young man who died for Greta, he's one of the 7 archangels in the Jewish tradition, and the only one specifically identified as an archangel in the Bible. In the New Testament, he is portrayed as the leader of heaven's armies in the war against Satan, and is thus considered the patron saint of soldiers in Christianity. Michael Furey will be remembered by Greta forever, overshadowing the weak presence of her husband, Gabriel. The snow may be a symbol of death because it covers the dead and the living people indifferently, the symbol of hopeless solitude and incommunicability. It is the symbol of the isolation and alienation of the artist in Dublin and in Ireland. At the same time, it may be the symbol of purification and life, since it clears the world of all the negative images. Therefore, the final image of the falling snow symbolically reconciles the life and the death. Another important symbol is the journey. Gabriel feels the time he has come for him to set out on his journey westward. Traditionally, going west means dying, and to Joyce himself leaving Ireland. Yet Greta and Michael, who lived and loved in Galway, represented the reality that must be faced. Gabriel's westward journey, which includes these implications, remains ambiguous, since he goes towards the west to meet life and death. As I said before, the red dots they represent the moment of epiphany. What does Gabriel become aware of? He realizes that he has played a very poor part in his wife's life. The words in blue are examples of alliteration and chiasmus, which is the reversal of the word order. And what about the language? The language may be defined as poetic. And if we now discuss the following questions, starting from the one, what is the situation described in this passage? Right. Gabriel sorry. The situation described is this one. Gabriel is watching Greta sleeping. They have come back to their hotel room after a Christmas party, and he starts thinking about the man who had died for his love to her wife. Why does the whole scene seem to lose a precise temporal connotation? because Gabriel's thoughts begin to wander from the past to the present and future. Thus, the scene acquires the tone of an eternal truth. What conflicts can be found in Gabriel's thoughts? The conflicts of death and life, taking and giving, past, present, and future. What has Greta's recalling Michael Furey caused to Gabriel to realize? It has caused him to realize that the guests of the party and he are more dead for Greta than Michael Furey. What does Gabriel become at the end? How does he perceive himself? He becomes one with all the living and the dead. Then, despite this dramatic fading out of his personality and his awareness of lacking love, Gabriel is no longer alone. He perceives himself as becoming part of the whole community of the living and the dead people. What is the main antithesis of this extract, this passage? It is the metaphorical pattern of life and death. Throughout the story, the living are shown as spiritually dead, and though Michael is physically dead, he is alive in Greta's heart. Okay, and now we can complete the summary of the whole passage together. And we can find that in this passage there is a combination of realism and symbolism. Everything is described in detail, but also overloaded with symbols. The personal names are symbols too. Gabriel, according to the Bible, is both the Prince of Fire and the Angel of Death. As for Michael, he is an angel too, and Michael Furey will live in Greta's memory forever, overshadowing the weak presence of her husband. The most effective antithesis is the widespread of the metaphorical pattern of life and death. Gabriel learns from the memory of a dead young man that a brief, passionate life can be more meaningful than a long, passionless life. The final image of the falling snow symbolically reconciles the life and the death. The snow may be a symbol of death, which covers the dead and the living indifferently. The snow is the symbol of the hopeless, solitude and incommunicability, or of the isolation and alienation of the artists in Dublin and Ireland. The snow is also the symbol of the purification and the life, because it clears the world of all the negative images. And the ending of the story, in the end of the story, the reader can only guess what the morning after will bring to Gabriel. Okay, and this is the end of the analysis of Dubliners and the passage dealing with Gabriel's epiphany. Okay, that's all for now. See you and take care.